So when it comes to working with forms, as mentioned before, we got multiple options. We can build everything from scratch, we can validate it on our own, and that's possible and sometimes might be the best approach, but often it's not because it means a lot of extra work from our side. Instead, we can let Django do that for us. We can still customize the form, as you learned earlier in the course, but we can let Django validate it and work with the submitted data. And here specifically, since we in the end want to fetch data for this comment, it would make sense to simply create a model form that is based on this comment model and fetches the inputs for that and then allows us to save that data. So to achieve this, I'll add a new forms.py file, and there from Django, I'll import forms. And then with this, we can add a new class, our comment form, which is forms or which inherits from forms.modelForm. We could also create a regular form, and that wouldn't be bad or anything like this, but creating a model form also makes a lot of sense because in the end that is what we want here. We want to create a form for our comment model. Now you learned how such a model form works. We add a nested meta class to configure it, for example to define the model to which this form is related. And for this, of course, we need to import that from .models. I'll import my comment model and set this as a value for the model property in this nested meta class. Then we have to define the fields that should be included. And here I don't want to include all the fields because this post field should not be set by the user. Users should only see these 3 fields. The post field instead should be set by us automatically. The post should basically be the post for which this comment was entered. So the post which was loaded here when a user entered something in that comment form, which will appear below that post. Therefore, in forms.py here, I will not add all fields, but instead we can add a list of all the fields we want to include, or we add the exclude field here and only list the fields which should be excluded. In this case, the post field. Now we also, as you learned, can override more data. For example, we can set our own labels. Django will automatically infer labels from our model, and for example, username written like this would result in a username label for the input. Now I would like to have a your name label instead, so I want to override this. Here I also want to have your email instead of user email. And therefore to override this and not use the default inferred labels, we can add the labels property to this meta class, set this to a dictionary, and then access the fields or use the fields from the model as keys in this dictionary. So for example, user underscore name, and set the value to the value or to the label we want to appear in the form. So in this case, your name. And then for a user email, I set this to your email. And for text, I will actually say your comment as a label. We can also fine-tune and tweak the error messages, as explained earlier in the course, but here I will actually leave it like this and not add any fine-tuning right now. Instead, this is now my comment form. Now we need to make sure that this form is passed to this single post template when the template is being rendered. And for this, we need to go back to our views. Now here, you might think that we add a new view, maybe based on the create view, which I also showed to you earlier in the course. But that won't really work here. That would only work if the comment would basically be entered on a standalone page, if we had a separate page for entering that comment data. I instead want to embed the comment form on a template which is rendered for a single post, so on the result of this view. And therefore, we can't use a create view here, at least not that easily. Hence, instead, I will simply go to get context data on this single post view, and here I will create my form and pass this to my context. So hence from .forms we import the comment form, and then create that form here and pass it to the template, maybe with a name of comment form, by calling comment form like this here. So by creating a new form here. This will now set up the form for this single post view. With that done, we now get the comment form in our template, and hence there, we can output it here. We can output our comment form here between the form tags, and then also add a button where we say save comment maybe. And if we save all files now, and we reload this single comment page, we have this form at the bottom. Super ugly, but we have that form. Now let's work on making that form prettier in the next lecture.